Here's a short, hook-driven intro that pulls the core emotion without spoilers, written in first person, clean and natural. I used to sit on the same park bench every evening because it was the only place where the silence didn't hurt. One night, a woman sat beside me and said a single sentence that changed the weight of my grief. We didn't look for love, and we didn't try to heal each other. But somehow, two broken lives began to move forward together. Hello, my name is David. I am 36 years old. I work as a doctor in a city hospital. I live alone in a small apartment not far from the park. I have been living there since my wife passed away 2 years ago. After long shifts, when the noise of the hospital stays in my head, I go to the same place every evening. The same park, the same bench. I do not sit there because it is beautiful. I sit there because it is quiet. No one expects anything from me there. In the hospital, I am the man who must know what to do. At home, I am the man who remembers too much. On that bench, I am just someone sitting, breathing, letting the day end. Most evenings look the same. I finish work late, buy something simple for dinner that I often forget to eat, and walk to the park. I sit down, place my hands on my knees, and watch people pass by. Couples walk their dogs. Parents call their children home. Old men play chess nearby. Life continues without asking if you are ready. I lost my wife after a short illness. 1 month she was fine, the next she was gone. I learned very quickly that the world does not stop for grief. That is something no one teaches you in medical school. Since then, evenings have been the hardest part of my day. Nights are quiet, but evenings still carry the weight of everything that happened. That bench became a habit, almost a routine. Same time, same place. I did not notice her at first. She had probably been there before. People come and go in parks all the time. But after a few days, I realized she was often there when I arrived. She sat a little distance away at first, always with a small bag, always looking straight ahead. She did not scroll on her phone. She did not read. She simply sat, like I did. Two strangers sharing the same silence without acknowledging each other. One evening, it started to rain lightly. Not enough to leave, just enough to change the air. I stayed. So did she. When the rain stopped, she stood up as if to leave, then paused. She looked at the bench, then at me, and slowly sat down closer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear my own breathing. I assumed she would stand up again, apologize, and leave. Instead, she spoke softly, almost as if she was continuing a thought that had started long before. My husband loved sitting here too. I turned my head and looked at her. She did not look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the trees ahead. There was no drama in her voice. No sadness meant to be noticed. Just a simple statement. I said nothing at first. Doctors are trained to respond, to explain, to fix. But there was nothing to fix in that sentence. So I simply nodded and said quietly that I came here every evening. She told me her name was Mary. She was 35, a schoolteacher. She lived nearby. She said her husband used to come to this park after work, just like me. After he died, she avoided the place for a long time. Then one day, she came back. We did not talk much more that evening. We did not exchange phone numbers. We did not ask personal questions. We just sat there, two people who understood something without needing details. When it got dark, Mary stood up. She wished me a good evening and walked away. I stayed a little longer than usual. For the first time in a long while, the silence did not feel empty. The next evening, I returned to the bench without thinking. She was already there. This time she smiled slightly and said hello. I greeted her back. We talked about small things. The weather, her students, my work schedule. Nothing heavy, nothing that hurt. But when I left that night, I realized something had changed. The bench was no longer just a place to survive the evening. It had become a place where someone else existed beside my grief. And that realization stayed with me as I walked home in the dark. The next days followed a quiet pattern. I finished my shifts, walked through the park, and found Mary already sitting on the bench or arriving a few minutes after me. There was no agreement, no message, no promise. It simply happened. The same hour, the same place. Two people choosing not to be alone. At first, our conversation stayed on the surface. We talked the way strangers do when they are careful not to cross invisible lines. She told me about her students, how children notice more than adults think, how silence in a classroom can sometimes say more than noise. I told her about the hospital, but without details. I avoided words like death, emergency, loss. I spoke about long corridors, about night shifts, about coffee that always tasted burnt. Sometimes we did not talk at all. We sat and watched the park slowly empty as evening turned into night. The silence between us was different from the silence I carried alone. It did not press on my chest. It simply existed. I noticed small things. Mary always arrived with the same bag. She crossed her legs when she sat down. She listened without interrupting. When I spoke, she looked at me, not past me. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. One evening, I arrived later than usual. A patient had taken longer than expected, and I almost skipped the park. When I reached the bench, Mary was already there, looking at her watch. When she saw me, she smiled, just briefly, as if she had been waiting without wanting to admit it. We talked about routines. I told her the bench had become part of my day because it asked nothing of me. She said she understood. Teaching demanded energy she did not always have. At home, the walls felt too loud with memories. The park gave her space to breathe. Loss entered the conversation naturally, without drama. She mentioned her husband when talking about a book he used to read. I mentioned my wife when explaining why I never cooked complicated meals anymore. We did not stop. We did not apologize. We simply continued. What surprised me was how little it hurt to speak her name out loud in front of someone else. I had avoided that for a long time. Saying my wife's name felt like opening a door I was not sure I could close again. But with Mary, the door did not slam. It stayed open just enough. A few days later, Mary did not come. I sat on the bench alone and told myself it meant nothing. People have lives. Schedules change. Still, I found myself checking the path every few minutes. I stayed longer than usual, long enough for the park lights to turn on. When I finally stood up, the bench felt heavier than it had in weeks. The next evening, she returned. She sat down slowly, as if unsure how to begin. She told me she had avoided the bench on purpose. Sitting there had started to feel too close. Not romantic. Not dangerous. Just real. And real things, she said, scared her more than loneliness. I told her I understood. More than I wanted to. I admitted the bench had stopped being just a place to pass time. It had become something I looked forward to. Saying that out loud made me uncomfortable, but it was true. There was a pause. A longer one than usual. Then Mary said something simple. She said she was glad she came back. From that evening on, our conversations deepened slightly, but we stayed careful. We shared small memories of our marriages. Nothing idealized. Just ordinary moments. Coffee cups left in the wrong place. Shoes by the door. Quiet evenings on the couch. We did not compare. We did not compete with the past. We respected it. One night, as we stood up to leave, Mary hesitated. She asked if I would like to walk a little before going home. Not far. Just around the park. I said yes without thinking. We walked side by side, not touching, talking about nothing important. But when we reached the corner where our paths separated, neither of us hurried away. As I walked home, I realized something had shifted again. I was not fixing anything. I was not moving on. I was simply allowing another person to exist next to me in the present. And for the first time in a long while, that felt enough. The walk became part of it. Not every night, but often enough that I started to expect it. We would sit on the bench for a while, talk a little, then stand up at the same time like it was natural. The first time, we walked in silence for a full minute, both of us listening to our own footsteps. Then Mary pointed at a dog chasing a stick and smiled, and the tension broke in a quiet, ordinary way. We kept it simple. One lap around the park, sometimes two if the air was mild. We did not touch. We did not make it into something bigger than it was. But it was something. One evening, I arrived early and found the bench empty. That was normal. I sat down anyway and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I checked the path more than once, pretending I was watching the trees. I told myself she was busy. Teachers stay late. Papers to grade. Meetings. A headache. A cold. Anything. Still, the longer I sat there, the more the silence returned to its old shape. I felt stupid for caring. I had known her only a short time. We had no arrangement. But the truth was, her absence felt personal. It was the first time I noticed how much space she had started to occupy in my evenings. By the time the park lights came on, I stood up and started walking home. Halfway there, I turned back, just once, like I might see her running toward the bench, apologizing, laughing at being late. The bench stayed empty. The next day at the hospital was the kind of day that squeezes everything out of you. Long hours, difficult conversations, families that wanted answers I could not give. a young patient who reminded me of someone I had once been. By the time my shift ended, I felt hollow. I almost skipped the park again. I told myself it was pointless to go and stare at an empty bench. But my feet carried me there the way they always did. Mary was sitting on the far end, her bag in her lap, both hands resting on it as if she needed something steady. She looked up when I approached. Her expression was careful, like she had been rehearsing what to say. "I didn't come yesterday," she said. I sat down slowly. I noticed. "I'm sorry," she added, quickly, then paused. "Not because I owe you an apology. I didn't want you to think I disappeared." I nodded. I didn't know what to think. She stared at the path in front of us, watching a jogger pass, then a couple walking their dog. "It started feeling too close," she said again. But this time she explained it differently. "Not the bench. Not you. The feeling of coming back to something." I waited. "My husband used to sit here after work," she said. "He'd say he needed to clear his head before he came home. I used to tease him about it. I'd say, 'What do you need to clear your head from? You work in an office.' And he'd laugh and say, 'Life.'" Her voice stayed steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. "After he died," she continued, "I avoided this place because it made me angry. Not at him. At the fact that he was gone and the bench was still here. The trees were still here. People were still walking their dogs. Everything kept moving. I understood that kind of anger. The kind that makes you feel guilty the moment you feel it. I came back because I thought I should," she said. "Like it was a step I was supposed to take. But then I met you, and suddenly it wasn't just a step. It was a new habit. And that scared me." I let the words settle before I spoke. "I didn't come here because I'm brave," I said. "I came here because it was easier than going straight home." Mary looked at me then, really looked. "Is your home hard?" I swallowed. I could have answered with something light. I could have joked. But the way she asked, it felt like she could handle the truth. "Yes," I said. "Not because it's a bad place. Because it's quiet. And because every object in it reminds me of a life that stopped." She nodded slowly, like she had been there too. "In the hospital," I went on, "people see me as someone who can manage anything. I'm the doctor. I'm supposed to be calm. I'm supposed to know what to do. And most days I can. But when I get home, I'm just a man who opens the door and expects to hear a voice that isn't there." Mary's eyes dropped to her hands. "I do the same thing," she admitted. "I put my key in the lock, and for half a second I still think he'll ask what I want for dinner." We sat with that for a while. The park sounds filled the space between our sentences. Then Mary said, very quietly, "I didn't come yesterday because I felt guilty that I was starting to look forward to this." The honesty hit me harder than anything she had said so far, because I felt the same, and I had not allowed myself to name it. "I felt it too," I said. She turned her head slightly. "Guilty?" "Yes," I answered. "And I also felt disappointed," which made me feel even worse. Mary exhaled, like someone releasing a breath they had been holding too long. "That's exactly it." After that, we talked more openly than we ever had. Not about romance. Not about the future. About ordinary pain. The kind that hides in routines. Mary told me she still taught every day like she was fine, because children deserved stability, and because adults at work often didn't know what to do with grief. She said people avoided saying her husband's name after a while, like it was a topic that had an expiration date. I told her about the day my wife died. Not the medical details. Just the feeling of standing in a hospital room and realizing my training did not protect me from being human. I admitted that sometimes, when I saw couples in the hallway holding hands, I felt a sharp kind of envy that surprised me. Mary listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't try to fix it. She simply said, "That makes sense." That sentence, simple as it was, made my chest loosen. We started sharing small memories, the safe ones. The ones that did not break us. Mary told me her husband used to forget his lunch on the kitchen counter and then call her from the parking lot, asking if she could bring it. She would pretend to be annoyed, but she always brought it. "Now I still look at the counter," she said, "even though there's nothing there." I told her my wife used to leave sticky notes on the fridge with messages like, "Don't forget to eat," because she knew I would come home from work and go straight to bed. I said I never threw those notes away. I kept them in a drawer because throwing them away felt like erasing her. Mary didn't judge. She just nodded, as if she understood exactly why a drawer could become sacred. At some point, without planning it, we laughed. Not loudly. Just a short, Surprised laugh when Mary described how her husband once wore two different shoes to a wedding because he was in a hurry. The laugh came out of me before I could stop it. For a second, I felt panic, as if the laughter betrayed something. Mary must have seen it in my face. She said gently, "Laughing doesn't mean we forgot them." I stared at the ground. "It feels like it sometimes." "It feels like that for me too," she admitted. "But I don't think it's true." The night air was colder than we expected. Mary pulled her coat tighter. I noticed her hands were slightly red from the cold. "Do you want to walk?" I asked, the way she had asked me before. "Or would you rather stay?" She hesitated, then stood up. "Let's walk." We walked slowly, keeping the same pace. The park was quieter than usual. The benches along the path were empty. The streetlights made small pools of light on the ground. After a few minutes, Mary said, "I used to think love was something you either had or you didn't. And if you lost it, that was it." I didn't answer right away. I was careful with my words because I didn't want to turn the conversation into something too big. "I don't know what it is," I said finally. "But I know this helps." Mary looked at me briefly. "Yes," she said. "It helps." When we reached the corner where we usually separated, Mary stopped. She didn't step away right away like before. She stood there, her bag hanging from her shoulder, her face turned toward me. "Thank you for waiting yesterday," she said. "I didn't know I was waiting," I admitted. She gave a small, tired smile. "You were." I nodded. "I'm glad you came back." Mary held my gaze for a second longer than usual. Then she said, "Me too." We said goodnight and went our separate ways. But as I walked home, I realized something that made my throat tighten. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just getting through the evening. I was beginning to feel like I belonged to the world again, even if only in a small corner of it, on a bench in a park, beside a woman who understood the weight of silence. After that evening, things did not suddenly change. There was no clear moment when something new began. Life continued in the same quiet rhythm, but with small additions that slowly reshaped our days. We still met at the bench, though not every evening. Some days Mary stayed late at school. Some days my shifts stretched into the night. But when we did meet, it felt natural, like something that fit into our lives instead of interrupting them. The walks became longer. Sometimes we left the park and walked through nearby streets, past small shops closing for the night and apartment buildings with warm lights behind the windows. We talked about ordinary things. Mary told me about a student who struggled with reading and how proud she felt when he finally read a full page out loud. I told her about a patient who recovered faster than expected and reminded me why I chose medicine in the first place. One evening, Mary suggested getting coffee. Not a date, just coffee. A small place near the park that stayed open late. I hesitated for half a second, then agreed. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and old wood. We sat at a small table by the window, our coats still on, our hands wrapped around warm cups. It felt strangely intimate, sitting across from each other instead of side by side. I became aware of her expressions, the way she frowned slightly when she listened carefully, the way her eyes softened when she smiled. I wondered what she noticed about me and whether she was doing the same quiet observing. Over time, coffee turned into something we did once or twice a week. Sometimes after that, sometimes before the bench. The bench remained important, but it was no longer the only place we existed together. Mary invited me to her apartment one evening when a shelf in her kitchen came loose. I brought basic tools from my car, embarrassed by how familiar that felt. Inside her apartment, everything was tidy but not staged. Books stacked in corners, a coat hanging over a chair, a framed photo turned face down on a shelf. I did not ask about it. She did not explain. As I fixed the shelf, she stood nearby, holding the screws, watching my hands. We talked about nothing important. When I finished, she thanked me and insisted on making tea. We sat at her small kitchen table, steam rising from our cups, the silence comfortable. Later, she helped me carry groceries to my apartment when she happened to be nearby. She noticed the sticky notes in a drawer when I opened it by accident. She did not comment. She did not look too long. That respect mattered. Despite the comfort, guilt followed us quietly. I felt it when I caught myself smiling at a message from Mary. I felt it when I looked forward to seeing her after work. A part of me questioned whether I was betraying my wife by allowing someone else into my life, even in this careful, gentle way. Mary felt it too. She admitted one night that she sometimes woke up with a sense of panic, like she was doing something wrong without knowing exactly why. We did not try to convince each other that the guilt was unnecessary. We simply acknowledged it. One evening, after coffee, someone we both knew saw us together. A colleague of Mary's. The next day, she told me the woman had asked questions. Innocent questions, but loaded with assumptions. Isn't it too soon? Mary said, repeating the words slowly, as if tasting them. That's what she asked. The question lingered between us. I felt defensive, then ashamed for feeling defensive. I told Mary that people liked timelines because they made discomfort easier to manage. She nodded, but looked troubled. For a few days after that, she pulled back slightly. Not distant, but careful. Shorter conversations. Fewer walks. I noticed and told myself not to push. Still, the space felt heavier than silence had ever felt before. One evening, as we sat on the bench, Mary finally spoke. I don't want to rush, she said. But I also don't want to freeze my life because other people are uncomfortable. I turned toward her. I don't want to rush either, I said. But I don't think what we're doing is rushing. She looked at the path in front of us. Sometimes I feel like people expect grief to end in isolation, she said. Like the only respectful way to remember someone is to stay alone. I thought about that. About how often grief was treated like something you were supposed to finish privately. Maybe moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, I said slowly. Maybe it just means carrying the past differently. Mary looked at me, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her expression. That's exactly how it feels, she said. From that point on, something settled between us. Not certainty, but permission. We began to share more of our daily lives. I started cooking simple meals again and invited Mary over. She laughed when I burned pasta and insisted on showing me a better way. We ate at my small table, talking about our days, cleaning up together afterward without discussing it. One night, as we stood in the kitchen, our hands brushed. We both noticed. Neither of us pulled away, but neither of us turned it into something more. The restraint felt deliberate, mutual. Weeks passed. The bench remained part of our story, but it no longer defined it. It became a place we returned to, not a place we were stuck in. One evening, Mary told me she had spoken to her parents about me. Not formally, just mentioned that she had met someone kind. Someone who understood. She said it quietly, watching my reaction. I felt a mix of fear and warmth. How did they react? I asked. They were cautious, she said. But they smiled. I told her that I had started thinking about things I had avoided before. Not plans, just possibilities. The idea that my life might include someone else in the future without erasing what came before. Mary listened, then said something that stayed with me. I don't want a replacement, she said. I want something new, something honest. That night, after she left, I stood in my apartment and noticed how it felt different. Not less empty, exactly, but more open. We were not healed. We were not whole. But we were learning, slowly, how to live forward without denying where we had come from. And for the first time, the idea of a future did not feel like a betrayal. Time did not rush us toward a conclusion. It moved the way it always does, quietly, day by day, allowing habits to turn into foundations. Mary and I kept building a life that fit us. Not dramatic, not loud, real. We still worked long hours. I still came home tired. She still graded papers late into the evening. But there was a sense of direction now, a feeling that our days were connected instead of isolated. The park bench remained, but it changed meaning. We no longer needed it every evening. Some nights we went there together, sat for a while, and talked about the week. Other nights we passed it without stopping, holding coffee cups, heading somewhere else. The bench became part of our history, not our shelter. One evening, Mary invited me to dinner with her parents. She was honest about her nerves. I understood them. Meeting parents meant acknowledging something out loud, even if no one used big words. Her parents were polite, careful, curious in the quiet way people are when they don't want to hurt someone they've never met. They asked me about my work, about the hospital, about where I grew up. They did not ask about my past marriage, but they did not avoid it either. When Mary mentioned her late husband, the table did not go silent. That mattered. On the way home, Mary exhaled like she had been holding her breath for hours. They like you, she said, then corrected herself. They trust you. A few weeks later, I told Mary something I had not said out loud since my wife died. I told her I had started thinking about children again. Not planning, not promising, just thinking. The thought surprised me as much as it scared me. Mary did not react immediately. She listened, then said she had been thinking about it too. about the kind of home she wanted in the future. Quiet, stable, honest. Not perfect, just safe. We did not rush into decisions. We talked. We disagreed sometimes. We adjusted. That was new for both of us. Grief had taught us caution. Love was teaching us cooperation. Eventually, Mary began spending more nights at my apartment. Slowly at first. A toothbrush. A sweater left on a chair. Her presence did not erase my memories. It softened the edges of them. One evening, we stood in the kitchen together, washing dishes. Nothing special. Just a routine. And I realized that this was what I had missed most. Not passion. Not excitement. Shared responsibility. Shared silence. The guilt that once followed us had faded into something quieter. Respect. We spoke about our late partners openly. Sometimes we shared stories. Sometimes we simply acknowledged important dates together. The past was no longer a wall between us. It was part of the ground we stood on. Months later, Mary suggested something simple. She asked if we could keep the bench as ours, but not as a place of sadness. As a place we returned to on purpose. We went there one evening near the end of summer. The park was calm. Families were heading home. The light was soft. We sat down together, close this time, our shoulders touching. My husband would have liked you, Mary said quietly. I swallowed. My wife would have trusted you, I replied. We sat there until the lights came on. The final step did not come with a big announcement. It came with a decision made over several conversations, paperwork, and long evenings at the table. Mary moved in. Fully. Not symbolically. Her books, her clothes, her routines became part of my apartment. The space changed. It no longer felt like a place waiting for something to return. It felt like a place moving forward. The last scene was ordinary, and that was the point. One evening, after dinner, we sat together planning the next year. Vacations, work schedules, family visits. We spoke about building a family in our own time, in our own way. Carefully, honestly. We were not two healed people pretending the past did not exist. We were two people who had lost deeply and learned how to choose life again. The bench was still there. The park was still there. But our lives were no longer paused. The story ended the way real stories do. Not with perfection, with stability, with commitment, with a future that made sense. Two broken hearts did not make a perfect one. They made a real family.